Welcome back to the Real Intelligence Podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Swim, and I'm so glad you're here today. As we jump in, I want to talk about a skill that is common to experts across disciplines. They share this defining trait. They devote more time and attention to careful observation, so they detect patterns, context, subtle deviations, more than novices. And this observational depth is a primary driver of their superior judgment and performance. Whether we're looking to improve our leadership, our parenting, our relationships, our health, whatever it is that's meaningful to us, observation is a key first step in intelligence gathering, in walking along our real intelligent path. There's strong evidence that people who intentionally spend time observing, however they do that, are more effective thinkers, better decision makers, and better performing whatever it is that is their expertise. So maybe you're thinking, well, I'm great at observing. I take time, I notice things. Fantastic. What tends to happen, though, is that we think we're observing things, but really we're judging things. We're actually not observing facts, data, patterns, as much as we tend to create a story or a next step to take. We have a bias toward action oftentimes. And it's not that we're bad at observation, it's just we're not really wired to do it most of the time. On the podcast, we talk a lot about neuroscience. We understand how our body is working with us. Well, in this case, our brain is typically so wired to predict the next step, to give us the next outcome, to make things more efficient for us, that actually they go into autopilot and they predict what's going to happen so we don't have to expend energy noticing things or really being in observation. That's why if you've ever seen those videos where people are playing basketball or they're engaged in something and then a big gorilla walks across the screen and nobody notices it, it's because our brains are already primed to filter out things we see as noise. It filters reality based on what it thinks matters. So we don't tend toward observation naturally. Now, this isn't just something cognitively we do, it's also cultural. We tend to have a bias in our culture in North America, celebrate speed and decisiveness. And so this takes out some of that pause to notice. Leaders or parents or professionals are often rewarded for acting quickly, not necessarily for seeing clearly. Now that catches up with us, right? There's always a balance between rushing to judgment and waiting too long and indecision. But we tend to have a bias that can get us out of observation and into action faster than what the situation actually requires or would best be served. The next reason we might not observe is that we have these emotions, and stress or frustration narrows our attention and helps us want to respond to what feels urgent, even if they're not that important. In our systems, when there are urgent things happening around us, whether coming from someone else or from our own emotion, we tend to override priority and step out of observation into that quick action. As a parent, maybe we snap at a child because we misread the situation, or a leader makes a decision in a meeting without noticing some of the hesitation of the team and some of the things that they aren't saying verbally, but they are saying with their tone and with their body language. Lastly, observation is uncomfortable in general because it requires patience and tolerance for that ambiguity that we don't like. We've talked a few times on this podcast about uncertainty and the discomfort of the gap, because that gap space where we don't know what's going to happen, it's uncertain, it's unpredictable, it's unknown, that feels really uncomfortable with our system, right? We've got our brain trying to predict our next step. And if we don't know what that next step is, there can be friction within our system. So it's not that we're lazy or not intelligent. It's just that all these factors, our autopilot, our cultural pressures, our emotions, our urge for that certainty, mean that we miss a lot of what is right in front of us. But here's the good news. Observation is not just a trait that some people, those experts out there, have. It's actually something that can be trained in each of us. When we pause and we notice, we can literally change outcomes in our parenting, in our leadership, in our life. So today we're going to define observation, really understand what is this and why does it matter? And then number two, we're going to talk about practical and simple things we could introduce to strengthen that muscle of observation so that we can have better outcomes, that we can make better decisions, and that we can be better problem solvers in any field of our lives. Let's start with defining observation. Observation is that intentional act of perceiving what is happening, perceiving internally and externally without interpreting or explaining it. It includes noticing contrasts, noticing changes, sensing with our physical bodies, noticing environmental cues, describing what is present without creating a story around it, perceiving something that's happening without assigning a motive or a meaning to it. When we observe, we answer the question, what is happening right now? We're not talking about what does this mean or what should I do or why does this matter? We are simply observing what is happening. When we're in true observation, we do need to slow down. We have to step out of our autopilot. Oftentimes this means we're slowing our body, we're slowing our breathing, we're really stepping back to take a moment to observe. To experience what I'm talking about somatically, I would invite you to just try on doing a neck roll. That simply means you drop your ear to your shoulder and you roll your neck down and around to your other shoulder and slow that down to the point where you can feel every little tension, every muscle as you move from one side to the other. When you slow that movement down, you recognize things that you couldn't if you just went through the motion of the neck roll. When we slow down our body, our breath, it sends that message, right, to step out of autopilot. Something is different here. We start to let multiple data points register. We name what is seen, heard, or felt. This process of observation can give us more awareness as long as we take the pause. Let's back up to look at why we really might want to invest in observation in our businesses and our personal lives. Boeing has an instructive example for us. In 2016, Boeing was competing with the Airbus. The Airbus had just made a new plane that used less fuel, and that meant airlines could save a lot of money. And if Boeing didn't quickly develop something to compete with Airbus, they would lose out on billions of dollars and future customers. So to keep up, they rushed to update one of their planes. There was not enough time and space in this process of development to really observe the plane, to observe the pilots in the plane, to observe and really pay attention to the indicators and safety warnings that were going off. I don't know all the reasons for the decisions that were made, but there seems to be a bias toward action and getting this plane out there to compete. At its core, this story illustrated the failure to slow down, to integrate the signals that they were picking up, to really observe what the people were saying, what the systems were saying, what the data was saying. And in the end, tragically, 346 people died in two crashes that were less than 5 months apart. And eventually, these Boeing 737 Maxes were grounded. They couldn't fly again. Now, again, I know there's multiple reasons for this, why this happened. But when we step back and understand the implications from an observation standpoint, that there really does need to be some space and some time to not only observe what we see, but also to pay attention in honesty to the signals that are coming up. When observation is rushed, when it's filtered, when it's politicized, the reality doesn't disappear. It doesn't change. It's going to show up later with higher stakes. And this happens in our relationships. This happens in our businesses. This happens in our bodies, right? How many of us have signals that are saying, you need to take a break? And we just push them aside because of that action bias. And we find ourselves not feeling well soon or burnt out at work, whatever it might be. Same with our families. We have this thought in our mind, like, I really maybe should spend a little more time with my family or developing a relationship or whatever it might be. We push that thought aside. We don't observe it because it doesn't fit with the stress signals that we're experiencing in our body, the urgency we feel. So we push that aside, and down the road, we're struggling in a relationship because we didn't allocate enough time to that. We didn't follow through on some of the indicators that were showing up for us. Now, if you're seeing yourself in some of these things and feeling guilt or judgment, I'd invite you to let that go, because the point of observation is to iterate and to grow, right? We don't observe to just dole out a judgment on ourselves or others. We observe to help us iterate to a new and improved place. In fact, there's a term that Toyota uses called Kaizen. It's a Japanese term, and it means change for the better or continuous improvement. So when we observe something we don't like, it's fantastic because it actually gives us the opportunity to then change for the better, to observe that current reality closely, to identify what's causing this friction right now, or what's causing this discomfort, or what's causing this change that's happening, this inconsistency. And then we could have a place to go with that, right? We can make a small change. We can test it out, and then we can learn from the results. So this is actually a really hopeful skill to practice because it allows us to discover, to iterate, and to improve. Now, maybe you're thinking, Jenny, I don't have time to sit around meditating all day. I acknowledge that there is a lot that can be happening in our life. The military actually uses a framework called the OODA Loop. This was developed by an Air Force colonel. And this is a framework for decision making under pressure. So if you're feeling like I have so many things pulling at me, how do I take the time to observe? You're in the right place. So this OODA loop is observe, orient, decide, and act. And what's interesting, what is the very first step? Every decision is only as good as the observation that feeds it. Here's a few examples of how our observation might lead us down a faulty path. Maybe we're having an interaction with our child. We're trying to work through something. And instead of listening to us, instead of giving us eye contact, they march away, they slam the door, and they're not willing to talk. Now, one way we could perceive that or observe what just happened was my child is having a meltdown and they're not respecting me. Do you see that we have a bias in that? We have created a story out of that. There is a chance that your child is overwhelmed with emotion. They're not trying to disrespect you, but they literally cannot, in their maturity capacity, in their little body, hold everything that they're feeling right now. Maybe you presented at a big meeting and you got very little feedback on if people liked what you presented, if they're on board with this new idea to move forward, and you leave and you say to yourself, "Ugh, that meeting failed." But perhaps that meeting didn't fail. Perhaps they're processing through your idea. Maybe that it's something they hadn't ever considered before. Maybe they need some time to digest that. So oftentimes we observe something, or we think we observe it, right, with my child, with a meeting, but we're actually coming from a place of bias, from story, from this filter of our past experiences that may or may not be genuine observation. So if we step into what is true observation, then maybe when I'm having that conversation with my child, I'm observing they're not saying a lot. They're not looking at me in the eye. They ran off. They slammed the door. It looks like there's some strong emotion present. I'm noticing in myself that my shoulders are tight. My voice is raised. I'm noticing this happened right after school. I'm noticing they didn't walk home with their best friend. Right? You're painting a bigger picture and you're just observing the facts about that picture. You're not assigning a story or a motive. In the meeting, maybe you observe it was really quiet. I noticed some nervousness within me. I noticed this was different than presentations in the past. I noticed my boss kept writing notes on their paper. Right? Those are observations again, rather than stories or judgments or interpretations. Okay, so let's talk about things that we can practice in order to improve this skill of observation, because again, it's not a trait, it's something that all of us can develop. So the first one is the 10% slower rule. So slowing our speech down, slowing down like we did with the neck roll to feel the sensation, slowing down our breath, slowing down our action, even if we're walking, if we're at our computer, slowing down our movement to really take us out of that autopilot, to slow down our response time. Perhaps the urge is to respond to that email really quickly. Maybe we decide, hey, I'm going to wait and respond at the end of the day. Or I'm going to go take a walk around the water cooler before I come back and put any thoughts around this. Or maybe when I'm talking to my child and something comes up, I'm going to take a few breaths before I respond. Maybe I'm even going to say, let me get back to you on that. Slightly slowing our speech and our movement can improve accuracy in our observation. So that's number one. Number two is to practice separating data from the story. So remember, observation answers the question, what is happening right now? Not what does it mean or what should I do? We can notice our body. We can notice our thoughts. We can notice our sensations. We can notice the environmental cues. We can notice patterns. We can notice tones, but we're not creating meaning from those in the observation step. Third option is to lean into uncertainty. Oftentimes we don't observe because it's really uncomfortable to be in the ambiguous. We've talked about this before on other podcast episodes, but really taking some time to recognize the discomfort. So name it to tame it. I'm uncomfortable because I don't have certainty here. I don't know what I'm going to do. I feel unsure. Maybe inhale that and exhale that out to just acknowledge what's here with you. So leaning into that just beyond that place of discomfort where I really have that instinct to act, but I'm going to give it just a little more time. And you'll find the sweet spot for that, right? That's not a science, that's an art. If we go back to the beginning, experts across fields tend to see sooner. Across medicine, aviation, emergency response, and in leadership, they scan broadly rather than fixate. They notice anomalies, not just what's normal. They delay action just long enough to see more. It's not hesitation. They're observing with discipline, making sure that they're taking in the picture that they need to see. They're using that first step of that OODA loop to observe before they orient, decide, and act. Let's recap. Observation is the first step in any wise decision-making. It is a foundational principle of real intelligence. Observation is the intentional act of perceiving what is happening. It answers the question, what is happening right now? Not why does that matter or what should I do? As we observe, studies show that our expertise in an area can grow. We start to pick up the data points necessary in whatever discipline that's important to us, so that our neural effort actually goes down, that our brains become better at distinguishing and extracting the right cues without the additional noise. Before you decide, before you correct, before you act, observe. Because when observation is based on true fact and correct data, our orientation clarifies, our decisions simplify, and action becomes aligned. That's not slowing down. That's real intelligence. Thanks for joining me today. If you found this episode helpful, please pass it along to someone else who might find similar benefit. Until we meet again.